friend lives right here for Miniature Monthly, and we just got back from the Windy City. That's right, Chicago, Illinois, and Adepticon. And let me tell you something, Adepticon 2019 was off the hook. Some amazing models there, lots and lots of hobby classes taught by tons of different teachers. It was really, really cool. One of my highlights was debuting one of my new courses, Airbrush Blending 102. And since I know you couldn't all go to Chicago and you couldn't all be in my airbrush blending class, I decided to make a video just for you. So let's get started. I'm using the bones figures that I used from the actual class, so please excuse the mold lines and stuff. This was just meant for practice, not for like a competition piece. I don't know if you've noticed, but Bones miniatures are relatively inexpensive, and they are a great way to practice on. In fact, I use them in all my classes because people aren't afraid to ruin them. It's not a $30 model. It's $2 or $3, good to go. So what is airbrush blending? Well, basically, airbrush blending is using your paintbrush and your airbrush in conjunction with each other. There's no real rules as to which one you have to use first or last. You can paint your base coats on by hand and come back in and airbrush. You can airbrush first, then paintbrush, then airbrush. It doesn't really matter. Basically what you're doing is you're getting the best look from both worlds. It also is really good when you're sketching in colors and stuff, you know, just blocking in colors, seeing how they look like. You can easily throw in some shadows with your airbrush. And one of these things, glazing is another thing that's very much more uniform when you're using it with the airbrush. So what we're going to be covering today is all the different things you need to know about airbrush blending. So to check your paint, to see if it's ready for airbrushing, I put the paint on the brush and I push it against the side of the cup. You see there, the paint is staying on top of the bristles. Now this is too thick, so we're going to need to thin this down. Now, every color is different, so you want to make sure that, that you thin them differently as well. I use these empty dropper bottles from Reaper Miniatures, and I just fill it up with my isopropyl distilled water solution, which is my thinning solution. So for 3 brushfuls, I think on this color it's a little bit thick. I'm gonna start with 5 drops of water. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And let's mix that up really good so that it's good and mixed up. Clean out my brush real quick. And to avoid getting more water in the brush, I always crimp it with my paper towel. So we're going to check our paint now. We've thinned it with our thinning solution, and I'll wipe off a little bit. And so we'll put it up like this. Still a lot of paint on the brush, but now you see how the paint gets pushed up through the brush, but then it cuts right back through. That's just about right for doing our base coat layers. So the paint's fairly thick, but it's thin enough to go through the airbrush. In stark contrast, this coal black, which will be my shadow color, it's gonna need less thinning solution. So I'm gonna start with like 3 drops. 1, 2, 3. So same amount of paint, less thinner, because the coal black is a much thinner consistency than the Eldritch. So always be mindful for how thick your paint is. Some of this you'll just learn from experience, on the job experience. But basically what we want to have is this color build up very quickly in our base tones. Alright, so moving on to our blending glaze. We've already got 5 drops of our thinning solution in here. I'm going to add maybe 7 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right now we're trying to get it thinner, but not so thin that it turns into our filter glaze. So we want paint that's thick enough to kind of clean up blends once we get going. So for this, you can't really tell by using the bristles, doing the bristle test, because obviously the paint was already coming through with the last layer. So what I usually do is I paint some on my thumb. So I'll wipe my brush off on a paper towel and then just kind of paint it on. That looks a little bit too thick, so I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more drops. We want it to be a little bit translucent, so let's check that again. And that one I think that's about right. So lastly is our filtering glaze. And we want this glaze to be really, really, really see-through. So I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 more drops of our blending or our thinning solution in there. Let us see how thin this will end up being. Wipe a little bit off. See on my finger here. And that you can see where it's really thick, built up. It's a little bit more opaque, but I think that's about perfect. So that won't change the color too much when we spray it on, but it will give us a nice filter and smooth out our blends. All right, so we got 3 thicknesses of paint. We've got our base coating thickness, which obviously is for putting the base layers of paint on. It's going to be a thicker consistency, so it builds up very, very fast. This is important for speed on armies and even for display minis. You just want to get that base coat on quickly. Next, we have our blending glaze, and this glaze is has to be a little bit more precise. You don't want it to be too thin because nothing happens, but you don't want it to be too thick because then it builds up too quickly. So we are going right about in the middle between those two. I'm typically only using my mid-tone color. A good way to test it is spray 2 or 3 times. If you start seeing the blend start being smoothed out, then you know that it's the perfect consistency. If it takes more sprays than that, 4 or 5 or 6 coats, and it's still not blending, you probably want to thicken that paint up a little bit by adding a little bit of your paint right out of the bottle. Our last thickness of paint is the filtering glaze, and this is not really going to change our colors at all. We're using either our mid-tone color or a shadow color. You could even use your highlight color too, if you're just going to adjust a little bit in the highlights, but typically it's a mid-tone or shadow color, and that will be very, very thin. You're going to spray 4, 5, 6 sprays, and it's not really going to change anything. All it does is filter the color, makes your blends really, really ultra smooth. They already have to be fairly smooth from the blending glaze. So once that happens, the filtering glaze will allow you to adjust your colors very slightly and make everything just super, super awesome looking. Generally, my workflow is always shadow first, mid-tone second, and then a highlight layer third. So we're going to do that here. And we're going to be spraying this. Spray your shadows from a angle from below up to 90 degrees, so parallel with the model. And the reason for this is if you spray just from below with your shadows, sometimes when you spray your midtones on, they don't quite reach that shadow color. So in our case, we've got black as a base coat. You're going to have coal black, and then it's going to fade to black, and then it's going to be your eldritch. And we don't want that. We want the eldritch to come all the way down and hit the coal black shadows. So if you spray from below and up to 90 degrees on your shadows, you're good to go. Put this in there. This is the color that you can kind of be messy with and get everywhere if you want. I'm going to do it here on the legs too, but we're mainly in this class we're going to focus on the upper body, but might as well while we got it. This is a great time to practice. You see, I'm spraying in very small spurts. A lot of people, they will, I see in my classes all the time, they spray with a continuous airflow, and then they pull back whenever they need paint. I find that that's really hard to control. I push my airflow and pull back on my paint almost at the same time. So that gives me pinpoint control. I can practice that control here with my shadow color, seeing if I can put my paint in a particular spot perfectly. We'll do the back of this neck darker, a little bit on the top of the head. So that's our shadow color. Then we just clean out our cup using clean out our airbrush. Use a little bit of this Badger cleaner, spray it through. Watching my spray, make sure it doesn't undulate. That is a sign of it clogging. Make sure there's no bubbles in my cup when it's spraying out. That would all be indicative of my nozzle clogging a little bit. I can check my needle, see if there's any dry tip. I don't see any there, so let us move on to our mid-tone color. All right, so for transferring my paint into the pot, I always use a paintbrush and just transfer it over that way. I've been doing this for several years now, and it just seems like I clog less. I don't know if it's the act of the paintbrush doesn't pick up little specks of paint or whatever, but for whatever reason, transferring paint into my pot via the paintbrush seems to work the best for not clogging all the time. So we'll just do a quick spray onto this paper towel, make sure that our paint looks fairly good. I'm not seeing speckling. That's a way of telling if your paint is maybe too is too thick. So if you see a little bit of speckling here or a lot of speckling, maybe you need to thin your paint just a little bit more. With this color, I'm going to go 45-degree angle to the model, and I'm going to spin it all the way around. I'm going to hit pretty much all my highlight areas. Not really worrying about specific lighting per se. And notice, spray it kind of light. See that zenithal white paint showing through a little bit. I think that's perfect. Again, using short sprays, just letting that paint flow on there. You see how quickly it builds up. That is perfect, perfect. Do those thighs. Spray the back again. What I usually do is I let the paint have a chance to dry. It dries almost instantly going on the model, but I want it to dry a little bit more in between coats. So I'll just work my way around the model several times, hitting all those areas. We're letting that thickness of the paint and the angle of our airbrush do a lot of work for us. All right, so for mixing a highlight, we have our mid-tone color of Eldritch here. I'm going to grab a little bit of white paint. This is Schminke Titanium White. And basically, we're going to mix it in. See how it changes the color right there? That right there would be too light. It's kind of a dead color. So we want to mix it all together. And we're going to try to get a different color than our mid-tone, but not too light. So we're going to have to play around with this just a little bit. So let's see what we got here. This is our Eldritch color right there. We've mixed up a little bit lighter tone. Let's add a little bit more white to it. Let's see if we can't get it a little bit lighter, but still retain our vibrancy. This is the part where you kind of maybe have to go back and forth just a little bit. You might have to add more Eldritch back into the mix because you went too light or whatever. But let's see here. Okay, so I think I like that color. Let's put it right next to it. So that's a good highlight. So let's see how it looks on the model. On this one, I'm going to stay at like a 45-degree angle, just like I did before. But I am going to stay in a small pocket of highlight area, right? Like right there. That's where I want my light source coming in. Same on the back. I want the light source coming in right about there. So it'll be, I won't spray as much on the back, so the light will be a little bit less. But let's see what this looks like. Just going to get it a little bit more vibrant. This is where slight adjustments might need to be made. I'm going to add just a little bit more white to that mix, just to pop it a little bit more. So I'm just going to mix it right into the cup. I don't typically do this, but on a small job like this, it's okay. I got that. I'm going to spray out most of that, and we're down to the little bit lighter color. Okay, I see that building up a little bit better. So Again, not too much, just enough. Okay, so you see how I had to make some minor adjustments to my highlights to get them to show up better. Sometimes you just have to put paint on the model to see what it looks like, and then just make adjustments on the fly. You also may notice that I talk about alive and dead colors quite a bit. An alive color has more saturation, whereas a dead color is more desaturated. I believe that saturated colors grab our attention, whereas dead colors or desaturated colors kind of fade to the distance. So if you want to make an area more interesting, try using saturated colors in your highlights, or just plain and simple using more saturation in your midtones. This will draw our attention. And if you're building an army, it will make your army just really explode off the gaming table. So for the first layer of highlights that will be painted on with our paintbrush, I'm going to mix up a color that I think will work. Again, I don't want it to be too light. And I'll just start adding it on. Now, watch when I apply these first, I know there'll be a highlight up here, right? So I'll put that on. Maybe that's too far of a jump in color, so I'm going to add a little bit more of my Eldritch back in and put that right on over it. Now I want you to take these muscles and paint the tops of them, where you know there'll be a highlight, and then I want you to bring that highlight down a little bit further than you think it should go. On these, the back part here, that highlight will actually go much further down than you think, so maybe just paint it on like that. We're not really trying to blend here. I want you to actually just paint brush strokes, and don't worry about blending too much. As you get better at the airbrush blending, you will find that if you blend a little bit with your paintbrush, that helps speed things up as well. So this whole thing is a time-saving scheme that we're doing. So anything that you can do to make it go faster is a good thing. Put these all on the high points. Alright, so now we got our blending glaze, which again is our midtone color. Got it all mixed up. We will see if it's too thin or too thick, and then move on. Basically, what you want to achieve with this color is you want to see those rough blends there go away. So I'll spray a little bit on my hand. This one is definitely, we're going to be spraying little 10% sprays. Like watch the end of this axe. It's just very small sprays. See how it reacts to black it's very, it looks a lot darker. So it's not, it doesn't have the, it doesn't build up the color the same as our base consistency did. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this area right here on the shoulder, and I'm just going to try to blend out. It should be with 1 or 2 hits. I just did it. It's blended. See how you got a highlight, mid-tone, shadow now. Let's do some over here on the upper neck. And there. Sometimes I just hit it once or twice, even in the highlight areas. You can also wipe stuff off if you get too much. Spray it on his back fat, bring that back up. Sometimes in the deeper areas, you know that you can get away with a little bit of it not blended because we're going to be putting a shadow back on there. So little bitty hits though. You don't want the color to build up too quickly or it'll start moving around. It'll start pooling on you and stuff like that. So just little hits with this glaze. The other thing that this blending glaze is doing is it's bringing back a little bit of the saturation we lost with our highlight color. Now, once you've done that, we can always adjust our highlight again. Get yourself a nice fine detail brush, because this paint you're going to want to put in a really small area, and we can just kind of bump up our highlights once again, like anything that we kind of lost a little bit. Maybe have on the upper edges. I find that a really light touch works here really well. You don't want to start creating a bunch of brush strokes again that we just got rid of. So bring your highlight back in. Kind of get some pop back into your color. Also, if you want to create some sort of textural type effects, you know, kind of dotted in, you can do that as well. Lines, if there's some wrinkles to the skin. You can also pick out little areas that, little micro details that maybe have been missed so far. As you can see, this is starting to build up fairly quickly. We're starting to get a nice effect. Now you might be thinking this looks a little bit weird, or it's not quite what you were envisioning, but you kind of got to trust the process, because once you get the shadows in and stuff, you start seeing things more, I think, the way they're supposed to be. And it will end up looking really, really cool. Sometimes if you miss areas, like this one down here, you can just paint it in right now by hand. I did one brush full of paint there to about 15 drops of my thinning solution. And we'll just load that up right in over highlight color. Not too worried about cleaning my cup out at this point. Let's see how that goes. That is super thin. Let me put some on my hand. Yeah, that's a really thin filter glaze, and we're going to spray that from below. This one, it's okay if it's a little bit thick, because it's not really changing the color too much. If you see it changing the color, stop and thin it a little bit more. But I think I have pretty much the perfect glazing solution here. I'm going to hit other areas, like maybe get up a little bit closer and see if I can hit right in the area of this muscle right there. Just create a little bit of depth there. Spray here. My lower areas on the arm, maybe I'll spray over the highlights too. And you can spray over highlights, mid-tone, shadows, whatever. It's not going to change the color too much. See on the back of that axe, it just toned it blue a little bit, a dark blue. These dark filters, I think, end up looking really, really good. So since we have our light coming from this direction over here, off to the left side, I'm going to spray more shadow on this side. So it's going to overtake a lot of our highlights and just kind of tone them a shadowy color. But I will still hit up under the armpits. And we'll do the same thing over here. We'll get a nice harder spray from this direction. All right. So now we're going to add what's called a kicker color. And for this eldritch, it is a greenish teal. And if you look at your color wheel, the color directly opposite of greenish teal is more of a magenta-y or a cooler red color. So we're going to use sanguine base for our kicker color. This is going to be a color that creates a little bit of interesting contrast within our color of the skin. So whenever you're painting and you want to put in a kicker color, just make sure it's on the opposite side of the color wheel. I don't want this color to be too strong, so I'm mixing it up kind of to our blending consistency, somewhere around there. So a little bit see-through, but not too see-through. I want it to show up, but I don't want it to be too dominant. All right, that looks good. A lot of times for my kicker colors, I put them on the dark side of the model, but there's really no rhyme or reason where it has to go. I just have learned to put it where it looks cool. So I'm going to add it maybe right up here under the armpit. So we'll just add a little bit richer color. Maybe in the face a little bit. That neck turned reddish. Way up in the armpit. If you spray a little bit too much, you can always just wipe it off. As you can see, we're starting to create a little bit richer color within our colors, and it's making that it's making the teal look a little bit more interesting. I just come back in and strengthen it a little bit. So that's our kicker color. Okay, so our shadow colors are going to be done with inks, and we are switching to our Sotar 2020 because it has a much finer needle. It will spray a finer spray, and we need that control in this part especially. So I'm going to be using Payne's Gray from Dalerani. It's a nice dark blue-black. And maybe just put like 1 or 2 drops in there of the ink. And now I will start forcing in some of my deeper shadows. I got my reading glasses on. I want to get up real close and personal and just kind of spraying those details. See that? I'm spraying. This is where you really want to get those 10% sprays or even less. So you want just the littlest bit, and you're going to be spraying in small spurts. So like under the armpit. Drive those shadows really, really deep. Now normally I've painted the whole model at this point. Oops. You see that really starts making that chest area, mid-torso look really sharp. The key is not to spray too much, because if you spray too much, you're toast. It will wreck the paint job. It will wreck everything you did. So really get good at those 10% sprays. Way up in this armpit. Sometimes you can't even see anything happening, but you'll slowly start to see the color change. So don't get impatient. Let the airbrush work for you. Let me do behind these ears. You can even try to hit the underside of some of these bigger muscles, especially on the dark side, on the back side of the model. Get that contrast really strong. Alright, so those are the basics for airbrush blending. The keys to remember: use your general purpose airbrush or a Patriot 105 for all your acrylics, and when switching to, say, inks or something like that, you're going to use a higher end airbrush like a Sotar 2020. This will give you the best results and the most efficiency with your airbrush. Alright, so what did we learn today? Number 1, every paint is different, so we have to thin them with different amounts of thinner. Number 2, when mixing your paints, be sure to mix them thoroughly. Number 3, when transferring your paint from your mixing cup to your airbrush's cup, Use a big brush. You'll find that you'll clog less. Number 4. Setting your air pressure between 40 psi and 60 psi will not only give you a much finer spray, but will also allow you to use thicker paints. Number 5. We learned that having shorter sprays will give you more control with your airbrush. Number 6. We learned that you can practice your brush control by spraying tiny dots. Try doing 3 10% sprays right on top of each other. That's right. Number 7. We learned how to quickly choose kicker colors and where to put them on the model. Number 8. We learned the power of inks in your shadows. Mind blown, baby. Alright, that's it for our introductory to airbrush blending. I hope this sends you well on your way to figuring out some things on your own and upping the quality of your paint jobs while lowering the speed. Lowering the slowness. Slowness, upping the quality and upping the speed, but lowering the slowness. All right, we on it. Get to painting. I want to see you guys leveling up and rocking it. I'm outie.
That's weird.
It is weird. But it's the truth, and people need to know the truth.
So the earth is flat.
The earth is flat.
You can't put that in your bloopers.
Write that down. Number 2, use a big brush to mix your... Son of a bitch. You'll find that you'll clog less. Motherfucker.